Welcome to Ultimate DIY, where you learn to be your own handyman, and today we're going to sand and paint this massive garage door. Would you look at the size of this thing? This is a massive garage that was built to house an RV. It's now used as a work area, but the paint is extremely bad and needs to be sanded and grinded off, gotten rid of, and needs to be repainted. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend a couple of days getting all the paint and everything off of this, and so that I don't bore you, we're going to do a lot of that in time lapse and just kind of give you a brief idea of what it looks like in different areas. Then I'm going to come back, we're going to power wash, and then we're going to spray an actual primer, and then we're going to paint it. And the paint we're going to use is an industrial grade paint that is extremely thick and heavy. It's almost like a paste roof coating that will cover all this metal and give it years of protection. The problem is I use an airless sprayer, and I don't know if the tip I have is going to be quite big enough, so I'm going to probably struggle a little bit when we apply that paint. So let's go ahead, and what I'll do first, I'll give you a little brief overview of the way the building actually looks in the paint, and then we'll go ahead and get into sanding, grinding, getting it prepared, power wash, prime, and paint. So let's get to it.
So I'll just start by saying I'm not really a big fan of doing voiceovers, but in this particular situation, my hands were dirty a lot of the time, and I do work alone. So it's kind of one of those things that's just a necessity. So if you're looking at this building, you're going to notice a lot of huge flaking all over the place. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is get a good metal scraper and start scraping the biggest chunks off that you can. And then from there, you'll move to a sanding disc and probably a sanding or grinding wheel. That's the way I do it most of the time. Now, you can use a chemical stripper, but this was a very large building and that was kind of difficult to do on this building. You can also use a portable sandblaster and sandblast it, but that would have went through a lot of sand and created a big mess everywhere that I would have had to deal with. So really it just came down to spending a few days, yes, I said few days, trying to get this thing prepped and ready. It's amazing. You'll spend 2-3 days prepping and you'll paint it within probably an hour. The industrial roll door was probably the hardest thing to deal with, though, because of all of those cracks and crevices in between each ridge, and you couldn't really get a sander in there. Even using a wire brush didn't really do much. So I had to get a powered wire wheel and hook it to my drill to get most of that off of there. You'll also notice there's a lot of rust everywhere that had to be treated and taken care of, because that would cause the paint to bubble up really quickly. One of the other things that you will notice is there was also a lot of mold all over the building from just years of setting. So prepping this building, it was just extremely tedious. You had to start on one corner and just work your way all the way around the building. So I took little bits and pieces of the cleaning process just to kind of let you see what it's like, and tried to fast forward it as much as possible just so that you get an idea of what all I had to go through to get this done. But the door actually took the absolute most time. It just seemed to go on and on forever. I started by scraping each one of the ridges and then trying to sand the surfaces with my palm sander, and then I ended up going and buying that wire wheel and wire wheeling the rest of it the following day. You'll notice all the rust around the bottom of those posts. That was extremely difficult to get off. But I even had to sand the very tops and all the way around. If you don't paint those, the front's not going to look good. That all you're going to see looking up is going to be those areas on the side that didn't get painted. So you basically have 3 roof areas, one above the man door, one above the garage door, and one on top of the garage. You also have to clean inside the area above the man door. All of this is going to be extremely visible. This is where I'm using the wire wheel to go ahead and clean the ridges out on the big roll door. It took an extreme amount of time to get this done correctly. So as soon as the roll door was finished, it was time to start power washing, and thank God my twin brother showed up to give me a hand. The only problem was he kept squirting me with the water. So the power washer that I'm using is a 4,000 PSI DeWalt power washer. It's got an extreme amount of power, so you always want to start the spray off of the building and then move it onto the building. And you'll work your way gently back and forth. Make sure you're wearing good safety glasses because you're going to be causing flakes to come off of the building and fly everywhere. Now you'll also notice that there's a lot of dirt coming off. I ended up going over this building 2 or 3 times, and each time more and more dirt would come off. You definitely want that to happen because the dirt will keep the paint from sticking correctly and it will not look good in the very end. But if you watch real close, you'll notice a lot of paint chunks are still coming off the building. That's the one great thing about that power washer, is it'll pull more of the excess loose paint off so that you won't have an issue with that paint coming up later with the new paint. Just to give you an idea how strong these power washers are, if you spray brick and leave it on there too long in one spot, you can literally remove the facing of your brick. You can also remove the mortar in between the brick, so you need to be very careful. You're going to notice here in a few minutes I'm about to hit some of the siding when I get done with this, and it's a vinyl siding. You can definitely clean vinyl siding, but you have to be careful because you can break it loose and it can go flying everywhere, and now you've created yourself another job. So as soon as I get done with this, you're going to see that I'm going to go ahead and clean the concrete that I'm standing on and make it look nice. I always do that as a little extra bonus for my customers, but I even clean the concrete driveway, and we'll have a separate video on that because I'm going to repair the crack in this driveway. One area you want to pay close attention to is fencing, like the fence on the left of the screen. If you hit that with a power washer, you're going to take finish off and you're going to have to refinish it. Now in my case, it was a very small section, so I went ahead and cleaned it so it would look uniform. Be very careful with a power washer and be very careful with spraying paint in that same area. You'll end up with the same result. You'll end up resurfacing and refinishing an entire fence. So not only is staining a fence extremely time consuming, but it's also extremely expensive. Stain is at an all-time high right now as far as the material cost goes. Another pro tip, be very careful with any power lines. If you look above my head, you're going to see lines going to the building, but these are not power lines. This is going to be internet lines and phone lines. You still don't want to hit them with the sprayer and cause any kind of problem, ripping them up or tearing them up, but just always be careful. So how crazy is it that we both look so much alike? We even dress alike. He wears the same color shirt, same color pants, even the same rubber boots. Heck, I wish you'd get rid of the DeWalt hat and get a Milwaukee so at least you could tell us apart. Oh, and by the way, I'm the good looking one on the right hand side. Okay, so now it's time to give the customer that bonus work I was talking about. Let's go ahead and clean the approach going up to this building. Now look real close and you'll see just how dirty this approach actually was. Most people don't realize it because they see it every day as they're pulling in and out of their driveway, and they have no idea that you can clean a driveway and make it look this nice and this new. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go ahead and clean the entire driveway and get it ready to fix the big huge cracks that are running down the center of the drive. Once you clean it and you fix those cracks, it'll look 1,000 times better. And you've also given the customer a few more years before they have to worry about trying to replace a driveway, which a driveway today could cost you anywhere from 10 to 20 grand. It's amazing how expensive concrete and concrete work is today. So after I spent a few hours completing the concrete cleaning, I went ahead and turned my attention to the front of the house and I cleaned the siding on the house. This is where you're going to notice the siding trying to come loose above the garage door. Be very careful when you're working with vinyl siding. And while you're looking at the garage door, you're going to probably notice that the trim that goes up the side of the garage door was not painted. They just recently replaced that garage door, and the person who installed it didn't paint it. Not only did they fail to paint the wood, but they also failed to put the silicone at the bottom that protects that wood from rot. One other thing that I did take care of for the customer at the very end of the project is the numbers that you see right here in the picture. I went ahead and repainted those black to make them look a little nicer as well. Now the paint is generally really strong on new garage doors, but still be really careful and move the wand rather quickly. Don't leave it in one spot too long. You don't want to take any of that paint off, because if you do, you're going to have another project on your hands and you're going to end up repainting that garage door as well. So now the building is complete, it's ready for paint, and we're fixing to do that next.
Okay guys, the very first thing we got to do today is we're going to have to mask off the areas that we do not want to get overspray on. That'll be the first part of this morning, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to put a primer on. I'll do a quick primer because this metal, it needs something to adhere to and hold really well, and then I'm going to put emerald oil-based paint over this so that it'll last for a very long time. And anytime you're using an oil-based paint, be sure you're using a respirator. You don't want to breathe the VOCs in. It'll make you sick and it's just not good for you. So be sure you're wearing a respirator. A latex paint, not quite so bad, but I would still wear at least a dust mask, a 3M mask, something to keep that out of your lungs. Another thing you'll probably want when it comes to mask is the 3M 2020 tape when I'm outside, because it works better on bricks than using the regular blue tape. And I also like to use a 3M masker. This makes things extremely quick when I'm trying to go around windows and things like that. I'll probably use this a little bit today, but maybe not quite as much, because I'm just going to put big sheets of paper on the side to make sure that nothing gets over there. It is not a windy day at all today, which is perfect because the last few days have been crazy out here, and it's delayed getting this thing painted because I didn't want overspray on people's cars and going on to homes and just basically losing a lot of product. So let's go ahead and get started, and I will mask everything up, get it ready. That'll be the first little part of the morning. We'll hook up the paint sprayer, get the gun ready, and we will go ahead and start spraying the primer and let that dry. It takes about an hour, and then I will end up putting on the oil-based paint today.
So when you're trying to protect areas that you don't want to get paint on, it's pretty simple. Just make sure that you get everything covered. Now, one thing I will tell you is if you're using a sprayer, the sprayer tends to really blow underneath things. So you have to make sure you run a good bead of tape all the way down. And like I mentioned earlier, the tape that you want to use if you're trying to tape the brick is going to be 3M's 2020 tape. It works extremely well. Don't use blue tape outside. The blue tape works great inside, does not work at all outside. Now I tend to go ahead and tape everything up the day I'm going to paint. There's been a few times where I've went ahead and I've taped everything up the night before. Sometimes that works out well, sometimes it doesn't. If it gets windy at night, it may rip everything down and you may end up doing it all over again. And to me, taping up everything and masking everything is one of the most painful parts of the job. But it makes everything else go so much better if you do a good job of it and protect everything. So to protect the ground, you'll see in a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and put some tarps down. I am going to leave the other garage door to your right open just so that I don't get any overspray on it, because it's a brand new door, even though it is bright white, just like the door that we're painting today. And make sure if there are any cars in the area that you move them 2 or 3 houses down to make sure they don't get any overspray on them as well. Now this whole area up above the little man door was kind of painful, trying to make sure that nothing gets on the siding, which, by the way, there was already a little paint on there from the previous paint job. They also painted a lot of the lines going into the house. I went ahead and masked some of those lines just to keep stuff off of them so that it would look better. I hate it when people just paint right over those. That it just kind of gives it a unprofessional look. So you will use a little bit of tape to get everything in areas like this really well done. Here you can see where I'm actually putting the tape over some of the black line to make sure that it doesn't get on it. Now you'll also notice in a minute I'm fixing to go ahead and put a blanket on top of the roof to protect the shingles, because this building goes up over the house and I'll be painting the sides. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and spread out the tarps and get them down. Now I raised the door so I can put the tarp underneath the door. That way it'll keep the paint from going underneath and getting on the concrete, and I have had that happen before. So always open your door, put your tarp down, and then close the door. Make sure that you've got a lot of tarps for a job like this. It's just like working inside. You don't want to get it all over the concrete, and you don't want to spend hours power washing the concrete trying to get the paint off. If you don't have tarps, go ahead and get some roll paper or some ram board and put it down to make sure that you don't end up causing damage. I noticed that this roll door needed some lubrication because it's making a lot of noise, but make sure you don't do that until after you've painted and the paint is dry. Otherwise, the new paint will not stick where it needs to. Now this is another area of the project that's extremely important. You're going to want to use that same 3M 2020 tape, and you're going to want to cover the rubber seal at the bottom of the garage door. Now I have seen people paint those and it looks awful. It splits, it cracks. It actually damages, I think, the seal where it doesn't have that rubberish elastic feel that it needs. So take your time and go ahead and cover that door really well at the bottom. I literally had to use 2 strips of the 3M tape all the way from one end to the other. Believe me, that's painful, and the tape is not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than trying to replace that rubber seal and having to deal with that mess. So just like I mentioned earlier with the power washer, you want to make sure that you cover the fence very well. You don't want anything changing on that fence, or you're going to get stuck restaining that entire fence. Also, another thing to keep in mind is watch out for trees, watch out for shrubs. You don't want to get paint on either one of those things. You can kill them, and you're going to be paying to have those shrubs replaced. And trees, if it's an old oak tree, good luck trying to replace that. So as I said earlier, take your time, mask everything very well, because once you start spraying and you get it on there, it may not come off that easily, especially if you're using what I'm using today, which is an oil-based paint. Oil-based paint does not come off things very easily. Even the new acrylic latex paints can be extremely painful to get off of things now. They're a much better paint than they were just even a couple of years ago. So you'll notice I use tape around the post, pillars, all over the concrete, and even as careful as I was here, I still ended up getting a little bit of blow-by paint onto the concrete. Next time I'll actually put tape on the pad against the concrete to make sure that doesn't happen. In this scene you can see where I'm protecting the shingles by covering it up and making sure that no paint can get on top of the shingle. So I not only put a tarp in front of the man door, but I also put a lot of masking tape underneath the door. Just because the door was so tight to the concrete, it really didn't go underneath it like it does on a garage door. So be sure you watch for areas like that as well. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how I get my airless sprayer set up to be able to spray either primer or paint. So you have a paint hose and you have the spray rig, and this is where a lot of newbies will actually destroy their spray unit. You'll notice that there's a nut on the end of the paint hose, and there's also one on the actual rig itself. You're going to need to use 2 wrenches, one to hold that nut that's up against the unit itself so it doesn't twist, because it's backed by plastic. And if you twist that, you're liable to break it off, and that's exactly what happens to a lot of people. Tighten it, get it good and snug, because it is going to be under pressure, usually between 2,500 and 3,000 psi. So attaching your spray gun to your paint hose works basically the same way. You're going to have two nuts that you're going to have to hold on to with two different wrenches. Now here, if you don't do that, what you're liable to do is break your actual paint hose itself. And believe me, I've done that before. It's not a lot of fun, especially if you're a ways away from a supply store and you have to make a special run to go buy a new hose. So just repeat the process that you did when you attached your paint hose to your spray rig. Go ahead and attach the spray gun the same way. Tighten it finger tight first, get it nice and snug, and then use the double wrenches again. One wrench will clamp on at the actual gun itself, and the other one will be at the hose. Use that one by the hose and tighten it up nice and tight. Now once I get those good and snug, I'll go ahead and pressure it up a little bit and check and make sure that I'm not losing any product on the ground. I also just changed the filter out, which is inside of the gun, so I'm having to make sure that that whole line is nice and tight. Because if the filter area is loose at all, it's going to spray you in the face as soon as you hit the power button on your spraying rig. So once you're sure everything is nice and tight, it's just a matter of putting on your spray guard at the end of the gun and your spray tip. Now, one of the things I'm going to have trouble with today is it's pretty chilly outside, and so the paint is not going to want to flow as nicely as you would like. So what you do in that case, if it's a latex, is you're going to add extra water to try to water it down a little, or you'll use things like mineral spirits if it's an oil base to try to get that to work right.
Okay guys, I'm going to try to show you a little bit of how I start my machine. Now one of the things I want to point out, if you saw me earlier, is when you put the connectors, there's always two connectors. One where you screw it on and one that's already there. Be sure that you put a wrench on both sides, because if not, you're going to crank down on this one and you're going to strip and tear this one up on this side. And it's the same thing with your guns. You have a fastener spot here and here, so put your wrench on this side, on the nut side, and on this nut side, and then twist and keep it from actually tearing up your gun. So I have my gun on right now. I've gone ahead and put the tip in. I don't necessarily have to have it in right at this second, but I went ahead and have it in. I have it set. I like to turn my guard this direction for my spraying. It works better for me because I like to spray up and down. And then if I go side to side, I turn it this way. Here's your on and off button on this machine. Now this is the Magnum Pro X17, and I've said it in previous videos. If you're going to get this machine, go ahead and get it with the wheels, because it makes this whole function much better. Now I normally have a strainer on here. I'm going to run it without a strainer right now because it's cold and this is very thick, this primer, so we're going to try the primer. You also have a button here that controls. I am plugged in, I'm on start, and then this is be your high spray. This is where you'll adjust your pressure. So you always put it on start, and this is where people forget. They'll go and start spraying, they'll think it's stopped, it's primed, it's ready to go, and it's just not spraying very well. It's spitting and sputtering, and it's because they did not move it over and move the pressure up. Okay, so we have that. Now I've got my primer here ready, and like I said, it's very thick. I had it pre-mixed at the store when I bought it, but we'll go ahead and see how it works. You just put the tube in like so. This is your overflow. This helps you prime, and I will usually stick this in here as well so that I can prime. Now it may get loud when I start it, but I'm going to show you what it does. Start, push the start button, and generally you have another button on this other side. And I can't really move the camera without getting it dirty, but it is a lever over here. And you will prime Yeah, when it's cold, it may take a second to really get it right. All right, let's try that now, and let's see what she does. There it goes. Sometimes it just takes a little persuasion. So it's filling up the lines right now. Okay, there we go.
All right, so to start with, we're going to apply the primer. And some of the things I'll suggest while you're spraying is always keep the gun moving. Never leave it in one spot, because if you do, you're going to create runs. But it's not the end of the world if that happens. Keep a rag nearby and you can wipe it off. And then after it dries a little bit, go back and reapply that. And normally I'll try to keep the spray tip about 12 inches away from the surface and try to keep it level as possible. In this big garage door, it was kind of hard to do because I was doing a lot of reaching, but I did use a ladder to try to get on the same level so that I wasn't just spraying up in a weird angle constantly. Another thing you'll notice as far as equipment is concerned is I like to use an extension. That gets the spray a lot closer to the surface that I'm trying to spray, and it saves a lot of wear and tear on my back and arms trying to bend, especially on a larger project. And it also allows me to get in areas that I couldn't get in with just a regular spray gun. So every bit of the surface should have primer on it, especially when you're dealing with metal, because you need something for that paint to hold on to. If you miss spots and you don't get the primer on there, don't expect that paint to hold up very well long term. So in most cases, one coat of primer is sufficient, but if you've got things like mold, mildew, maybe even oil stains trying to seep through, you may have to go over it 2 and 3 times. There were several spots on this garage that I had to go over a few times to get it right. There were several spots I could still see the outline of the old paint, so I had to go back and sandpaper and feather those edges so that it would make it look right. Pro tip on some of the commercial grade paint: use a regular paint can opener and bend the tabs up so that you can actually pull the lid off. I noticed that even though this paint was pre-mixed, I still had a lot of the oil at the top without the tint. So I thought I'd use a stir stick and see if that would go ahead and stir that top in a little bit better. That didn't work, so I had to go ahead and break out the mixer. Now, the only hard part about this was not mixing it so hard that I threw it all over my clothes and all over me. Not that it matters much after I see my shoes in the video now. So when I start painting, I generally will start at the top of a structure and work my way down. So I started at the very top, and I went ahead and put a coat on the very roof of this structure as well, up around the garage door area, just to give it a little extra protection. Also, if people are looking up at the garage from the sides, you want to make sure that they're not seeing just bare metal on the side. It looks a lot better if everything's painted. I then went ahead and painted underneath the little canopy and the top of the canopy before I started working on the main garage itself. So you can see that I'm still working from the top to the bottom. And one of the main reasons I do that is that if I spray the bottom and get it really nice in the way I like it, and then I start spraying up at the top and my gun jams and I end up with overspray or droplets, it's going to ruin what I've done down lower. So this industrial type paint though did cause the gun to jam quite a bit. If you're not familiar with like a Graco gun, the tips on these guns are reversible, meaning that if you reverse the tip inside of your gun, it will clear a clog. Turn it back the opposite direction and you're ready to spray again. Another very important thing to keep in mind when you're spray painting a garage door is try not to put too much paint on at one time. You'll cause a lot of runs. It's better to put several thinner coats than one really heavy thick coat. So that being said, just take your time. You'll have much better results in the long run.
Okay guys, the massive garage door is painted. This is a garage door that obviously was made for an RV. It was very big. Took a lot of paint, a lot of time, and a lot of prep. But it came out really well. Some of the things to keep in mind: be sure that you wrap the bottom, the rubber. Make sure that you put something on it to protect it. Don't just spray that. It not only looks awful, but it destroys it over time. It'll start cracking and rotting faster with the paint covering on it. It just looks terrible. So make sure you do that around your posts like these right here. Be sure you tape out a ways. I taped, but I still got a little bit of overspray. Even though I taped and I had a tarp, next time I will actually put tape on the tarp as well to help keep things from going up underneath. That can be fixed pretty easily with a power washer though, if you need to get that off of there, if you get a lot of it. But overall, everything went good. That paint did cause a little bit of runs in some spots, and if they're troublesome after it dries nice and hard, you can go back and you can sand that back down and put some fresh paint. So if you got anything out of today's video, be sure you hit that subscribe button if you're not a subscriber, and hit the little bell notification button so you know about all the upcoming videos as I release them. Leave me a comment, leave me a like. We also now are at our first level of monetization. If you would like to leave a little tip at the bottom, that really helps the channel so we can buy some new equipment, and I do appreciate that. For all the things that I've used in the video, be sure you look for the links. I will have a lot of Amazon links, and now we are set up with Home Depot, so I will start having some Home Depot links as well. That way you can find the products and the things that I use and be able to buy them for your own projects. So I hope to catch you guys on the next one, and I do appreciate you watching.